You will know pain. Swift death. I will bathe this world in blood. Impressive, but futile. Swift death. You will know pain. Inevitable. Swift death.
This Castwell channeling, or rather Catswell channeling, Poison Soulrend of the Spiral, Poison Pathfinder, represents the culmination of me trying to find a budget-friendly, kind of unique twist on a T17 viable farmer. And I'm very happy, after many, many hours, to share this build with you guys. The main thing that I was doing over the past couple weeks is trying out builds that have different defensive characteristics and defensive archetypes and trying to find the most budget-friendly version of smashing all that together that I could. At time of recording, all of this can be put together for pretty darn cheap. The defenses of this build are very, very strong. As always, something in a T17 map will usually get through it. However, at this budget, as long as you don't roll insane T17s, you should be able to get all of the bosses down, be able to farm all of that pretty easily. And then at high investment, you can go all out, get a Progenesis and a Nimbus, over double your damage and basically double your defenses, and you can do pretty much everything in the game pretty darn comfortably. With that said, this is effectively a melee poison build, and it requires a few seconds of ramp. So any Ubers that are teleporting around a lot that you can't really do easily melee, specifically someone like Cirrus, this is relatively uncomfortable to do, but it can do it. I did kill Uber Cirrus last night with this setup, but it was not very fun. So without further ado, let's go over what this build is and why I like it so much. All right, hello. I am super happy to share this with you guys after especially all of the obnoxious false starts last week. But yeah, my original plan was to make a video for every single build that I tried, but there were so many I don't want to make a video about something that I'm not excited about. So this is what we have here. Like I said at the beginning, my restriction that I put on myself here was something that was relatively budget friendly. I can farm T17 maps, not incredibly well or incredibly fast, but pretty darn comfortably. And the nice thing about it also is it feels pretty good in regular T16s as well. So it's not just a mega cluunky like T17 only farmer or boss only farmer, something like that. Really try to be something well-rounded and pretty easy to play. So what this build is a Cyclone Castwell channeling build. So we're using Soulrend of the Spiral right here. And what this does is when you cast Soulrend, in fact, let me take out Returning Proj as well. So when you cast it, it will shoot out all of the cats. You got to get the cat MTX. It'll shoot them all out in a spiral around your character. They don't spiral like Spectral Helix, but they come out in a circular pattern around your character. So this is how they come out. By default, you can only hit one enemy once with all of those cats. So even the fact that I am shooting out 5 different projectiles right now, I can only hit them once. However, if we link this to returning projectiles, they will actually all come back. So we are actually hitting 6 times. If we're standing exactly in the enemy, we hit 6 times. But the downside of using returning projectiles is it does deal 60% less damage for all those returning projectiles. So we get 1 out, and then the 5 that come back, that is multiplied times 0.4 for the number of hits that we're actually doing. And then, like I said at the beginning, if you toss in a Nimbus, you don't have to run Returning Proj anymore. You can run something like GMP or Deadly Ailments, depending on your own preference right there. And then Nimbus has 100% damage on all of the returning projectiles. So in that example, we will be shooting out 9 projectiles that will get 10 full damage. So we get the 10x damage straight up with no less multiplier. So, once you get a Nimbus on this build, obviously the budget goes crazy, but the damage can get really, really good with that. This is kind of like the low budget setup. So what we're doing here is we have Cyclone Castwell channeling with return projectiles. So you're asking, why are you doing Cyclone Castwell channeling? The main thing for this, for me, is comfort. So the nice thing here is we effectively get phasing. We can be moving nonstop. We don't have to sit there and kind of stutter step with self-casting. And we get a bunch of additional hits from our Cyclone as well, which will activate Nature's Reprisal. That'll give us more Wither stacks. That feels kind of good as well. Now, with that said, a self-cast setup, is pretty typical right now. There are people doing that at the moment, primarily with a Mahuzadal setup. I tried, that was actually what I initially started with, was trying to do the Mahuzadals. It was very strong, but I didn't really love it. And I think for something that you just want to run through a T16 map really quickly, it didn't feel awesome. And cast while channeling is really easy to get into. Obviously, you can also do a cast on crit setup. Cast on crit, you can trigger 10 times a second, get a lot more damage, just scaling on hit damage. But poison on a Pathfinder has easier scaling and easier ramp. So on a lower budget, it's a lot easier to get into than a cast on crit, power charge stacking, doing all that type of stuff, trying to get crit multi. So that's what we're doing. We're doing Cyclone, cast while channeling, returning projectiles on the Soul Rend of Spiral. The other nice thing about Cyclone is we can stand inside the enemy. Because we have phasing, we want to stand exactly in the middle of the monster that we're fighting, and then we get all of the poison stacks as all of the cats returning will add poison stacks onto the enemy. And then the other thing that we're doing here is we're using the Anathema Ring that allows us to scale our curse limit based on our number of power charges. So what we're doing here is I'm anointing Overcharge. This will give us a power charge, which we don't care about because we're not crit, but that also gives us an additional curse. And then also by taking Infused right here, we get a very easily accessible 5 curse setup on our build. So what I'm doing is I have Arcanist Brand with Punishment, Tempt Chains, and Despair, and then I am manually casting Poacher's Mark. If you really want to, you can also get a Mark on Hit setup with the Poacher's Mark. I opted to manually cast it, but Mark on Hit's totally fine as well. And then we have a Cast When Damage Taken setup here with Enfeeble. So that's all 5 of our curses. And the nice thing is with Enfeeble and Tempt Chains on a monster, it is a gigantically strong defensive layer. And then we also have Frost Shield right here, which we'll go into in a second on why that's so strong. And then the other stuff that we're doing for scaling damage is just gem levels, gem levels, gem levels. And the nice thing at time of recording is this is very cheap and easily accessible. So a nice thing they did this league or last league, I forget which league exactly, is the Darkseer got reworked. So now it is absolutely cracked and insane. So it gives you by default, no matter what, +2 to level of all spell skill gems, 10% chance to blind on hit. Enemies blinded have Malediction, which makes them take 10% increased damage and deal 10% reduced damage. And then it will have 2 random rolls of modifiers per level. This can have life, energy shield, and mana, I believe are the 3 stats it can roll randomly. You want to go for life and energy shield, and then this range can be between 1 and 2. You want 2 life no matter what, and then 1 or 2 energy shield is fine. So you'll notice that I have 5,157 life, and that is because of the Darkseer. Particularly at level 100, you want to get to level 100 for sure. Each one of these is giving me 200 flat life. I'm getting 400 flat life from my Darkseers. One of mine, I did get lucky with a +2/+2 roll for the energy shield, but the big thing here is that +400 flat life, as well as I'm getting +300 flat energy shield just from my Darkseers right here. And then because it has +2 level of all spell skill gems, it levels up our auras, it levels up our curses, and then most specifically, it levels up our Soul Rend. That, in addition to a Replicate Dragonflight right now, which we can get with +1 Soul Rend gems, or +3 Soul Rend gems, is very, very cheap. So you can get this for 1 to 2 divines very, very easily for a Soul Rend Replicate Dragonfangs. So that was easily accessible, and that allows us to have a level 31 Soul Rend of the Spiral at the moment. That's really where our damage comes from right now, and you can see how I try to keep this as budget-friendly as possible. Going for an Anathema right here, you can see that it is pretty cheap. If you do want to go for a Corrupted Implicit for some res, it will cost a little bit more. This is the general idea right here, is we're just scaling curses and gem levels, and this is where we're trying to budget efficiently, try to get as much damage as we can. So on the defensive side of things, we are wearing the belt. The belt. If you're a Pathfinder right now, it's really, really hard to not use this belt. Even a lot of shadows are using it, and some champions as well, because it's just so accessible. So there's 3 things about this belt that make it so strong, particularly for a Pathfinder. The number one thing is just getting all of the charges. This allows us to more easily just keep our Flask Finder set up where we have 100% uptime of our flasks. Makes it so much easier to roll than having to use, really, really having to go all out in increased flask charges gained everywhere that you can. Just getting that utility flask gain 3 charges every 3 seconds. That's the most important thing. That 3 right there in the utility is so huge. And then recommended having at least 1 on the life flask. 2 is nice as well. But make sure you have at least 1 on the life flask and 3 on the utility flask. This, as you can see, if you just look at my flasks, I have 100% uptime of them all the time. They are always available. It's a little bit worse with my Quicksilver flask because it's just not up as much. I'm just wearing this one when I'm just trying to blast my maps as quickly as possible. If I am killing monsters, I have 100% uptime here. And then the nice thing is I get to run really, really smoothly and fast without a Mage Blood or anything. And that's with 24% movement speed boots and all that. But if I'm just trying to be very tanky, if I'm just trying to fight a boss, I put on my Topaz Flask. I have 100% uptime. Similar thing here is if I'm just trying to blast maps, a Dying Sun is really good. Dying Sun's also expensive, but +2 proj. That's another 0.8 projectiles, right? Because of the returning proj. It's another 0.8 projectiles of poison damage, which is really nice for us. So Dying Sun right here is really good for mapping, but we wouldn't have 100% uptime, so I just like to use my Ruby Flask right here. So with our flasks all instilled, we have 100% uptime of all of our utility flasks. And then the other really nice thing here is the flasks have 25% increased effect. With the Mage Blood, you can enkindle your flasks and get, 95% increased effect. However, it doesn't work for unique flasks. So the huge thing here is something like the Taste of Hate, something like the Sorrow of the Divine that we're using here. We also get 25% increased effect for these flasks. So this translates into more fizz taken as elemental, which is really huge for this build. And then later on, if we're using a Progenesis, the Progenesis gets 25% stronger, and then we just become a Giga Tank with that. And then the last thing is we are using Master Surgeon on this build with the Replica Sorrow of the Divine, which we'll talk about in just a second. So Master Surgeon, life flasks are always going. They don't remove when it fills up. This way we can just keep our flask going all of the time. We have 50% less life recovery from flasks. However, we can make up for that with a 100% increase on the Tides of Time, as well as rolling as much increase recovered that we can on the flask. So yeah, the Tides of Time is absolutely crucial to this build. It is relatively cheap right now, about 2 divines for a decent roll, and then keeping all of our flasks going is the crux. So going over the flask setup, let's just transition into that, is we're using Replica Sorrow of the Divine. This is becoming relatively popular for people that are using Tides of Time on a Flask Finder setup because it gives us a free Eldritch Battery as well as life recovery with the Master Surgeon applying to Energy Shield. So even with a relatively low Energy Shield, we don't really care about how big our Energy Shield is as long as it's big enough because we effectively have infinite mana, infinite Energy Shield with the Replica Sorrow of the Divine. Because that life recovery from the flasks that we're getting a ton of is also applying to Energy Shield and giving us Eldritch Battery, so we get a Divine Blessing on our Malevolence, and look at this. When this is going, I have my regular recharge, I have to sit here and wait, cast my Divine Blessing, but look when I use my flask.
I'm not up to this.
It's just straight up infinite. So that allows us to not care about our mana expenditure whatsoever as long as our mana cost is not out of control. Not to mention with the amount of increased flask effect that we have, that 40% damage from the Sulfur Flask is also giving us quite a bit of damage. For the other flasks, I'm using Reduced Curse Effect, Evasion Rating. I want these rolled up to have the increased effect on the prefix because we can just keep them up all the time. And then again, like I said, Taste of Hate is crucial with the 15% roll on the Fizz taken as cold. So this is what I roll when I'm just running a T17 map, but if I want to go fast and like a T16, then I'll use my Quicksilver that is just made to go as quickly as possible. And now, speaking of which, let's go over the most uncomfortable part about playing this build. And this is just true of all Tides of Time, Master Surgeon, Sorrow of the Divine setups, and that is the Life Flask. You'll notice that I need that Life Flask to keep my mana up. Pretty much our strongest defensive layer is how much recovery rate that we have. We do have a really, really good max hit, so we don't worry about that too much. But the big thing that we have here is about 3,500 life recovered per second, which is more than 100% of my unreserved life per second. So that's the big thing that allows us to just tank a lot of stuff. We pretty much can't get shotgunned. It's really hard to overwhelm our life recovery as long as we don't take over 100% of our life in just a single second. We'll always have that back. That is assuming that you are pressing your life flask every 5 seconds very consistently. We are tanky enough that you can kind of fall off a little bit. You don't have to be perfect, but you do want to make sure whatever tools you have access to remind yourself to press that life flask as efficiently as possible. That is very, very crucial. Also, the rolls on this life flask are also specific. You need exactly these rolls. I recommend getting a fracture of either one of these and then rolling the other one on it. So you need immunity to bleed and immunity to corrupted blood right here. You could get a corrupted blood jewel, but because we have so much life recovery, as long as you're pressing every 5 seconds or so, you really don't care about corrupted blood other than that. And also, this is our only way to get rid of bleed. You could go for an anti-bleed corrupted anathema, but that is very expensive, so I don't recommend that. And then on the prefix, you very, very much want the increased amount recovered and reduced recovery rate. Reduced recovery rate means that the flask lasts longer, which is really, really big for the comfort of playing this build, making sure that you're always pressing that flask every 5 seconds. That is by far the worst part about the build. If I've ever died on this build, it's either I'm standing in the dumbest thing possible, like a gigantic Uber Slam, or I forget to press my life flask. Those are the two things that will kill you. As long as you're able to press that flask every 5 seconds, you're good to go. And then the next thing that really makes this build as tanky as possible is Fizz taken as elemental. And the crucial thing that you have to get here, that's going to be the most annoying thing for you for putting the build together, or the most interesting puzzle to solve, is going to be hitting 100% of Fizz taken as elemental on this build. First off, we have the Taste of Hate right here. Because we have 70%, currently you want to double check this in POB. Let me grab the POB right here. We can check this. So if you go to, in fact, I'll make it bigger for you guys. We'll get some movie magic with me just kind of like hand scrolling this around. So you want to go to your Fizz taken as right here. So you can go to your damage taken in your calcs page and you see your Fizz taken as. You want to look right here and make sure that all these numbers add up to 100. So you'll see that I have 40% for my Cloak of Flame. You can use a Lightning Coil that goes to 50%, but Lightning Coil doesn't work against dots, and you get negative 60 Lightning Res, which makes balancing Res very uncomfortable on this build. That's the tough thing, is Res and enough stats. You need Int and Strength as well. Those are going to be the three things that are kind of tricky to balance on this build because we're using so many uniques. So I have 40% from the Cloak of Flame. I have a Watcher's Eye that gives me 12% Fizz taken as Ellie when affected by period of elements. So ideally you want one of those. You can drop that and go for a Lightning Coil like I said. Then I have 14% on my helmet. Here, we're gonna do this, make it a little bit easier for you guys to see things. So you want the implicit on your helmet there for Fizz taken as any of the elements. Cold or fire is ideal. And then the crafted Corel prefix as well on your helmet. And then as you can see, because we have so much increased Flask effect, I'm getting 25 for my Taste of Hate. And then last up is the Lethal Pride. So that's gonna be the tricky thing for you guys here, is getting the right Lethal Pride. And I'm going to give you guys a search that will not be exhaustive, but one that you can use to find some lethal prides for yourself. But the key here is I have 5% Fizz taken as fire on Infused as well as Blood Drinker. So you can do a search for adding it on Clever Thief. You can add it on Mind Drinker, which is kind of not very ideal. You can add it on Circle of Life. You could add it on Soul Thief. Of course, if you take any of these, the efficiency of the build gets a little bit worse. Oh, you can also add it on Mark the Prey. We're also using that. So I'm going to give you guys a search. I will link it in the description below right here of a timeless jewel search. And yeah, I'll give you guys a search right here that will find one that you can use. And you can find the trades right here. So you go to this, you click trade, and you hope that there's one available. Look at that. You can get one for 1 divine right now. Buying these is really annoying, by the way. I just want to set that expectation. Really, really a pain in the butt. And if you do struggle on getting a good lethal pride, you can get a 5% very easily, but a 10% or 15% can be kind of tricky to get. So you just want to make sure that number adds up to 100. So you can get a 5, 10, or 15% lethal pride, and then balance the other numbers based on that. Getting a Lightning Coil, you can go for 10% on the prefix and 8% on the implicit if you go for the Delve mod or just higher tiers. But 6% is the lowest. These are the lowest tiers that you can go for. You could get a little bit more Flask effect to get the Taste of Hate to like 27%, I believe. If you really go all out and you find all the Flask effect on the tree, that's the most important thing. And as you can see, my Fizz max hit is 51k. So we got 51k Fizz max hit, and that's 89k EHP. But I think the EHP is actually kind of better than that because we have so much recovery. This is with Frost Shield turned off. Frost Shield will be on most of the time when you're fighting anything kind of difficult. And so if we turn on Frost Shield and go to 4 stages on the Frost Shield, you can see that the EHP goes to 151k and the max hit goes to 86, 88k. Gets really, really good when Frost Shield is active, and it will be active most of the time when you're fighting a difficult enemy. So I just want to make that clear that this is with all of that turned off. I don't have any guard skills or anything. Oh, and it's actually a little bit better than that. I had Debilitated unchecked. Debilitated will be active most of the time. If the enemy hits you and they have punishment on them, Debilitate will be active and they will be dealing 10% less damage, which is even better than that. We have a ton of defensive layers in the build and it feels really, really good. This is my very conservative setup. This is only 10 Wither stacks, and this is with the number of projectiles only set to 3. I think the average damage is a little bit higher than this. I think it's closer to 15 million, but I am trying to keep this as conservative as possible. In terms of the playstyle, what you're going to be doing is pressing your life flask every 5 seconds. You do have a Malevolence Divine Blessing here that you have to cast every 19 seconds or so. Yeah, 18.5 seconds. I did take the Mastery here for 50% increased duration. Makes that a lot more comfortable to keep that up. But if you want more tank, you can go for the +1 all res as well. You're just going to Cyclone around and just Frostblink occasionally. The cats will go out. They do have like a little bit of heat seeking. They're going to kill the enemies as you're kind of mapping around, and it feels really, really good. Like I said, the Watcher's Eye right here, you want that Fizz taken as fire while affected by Purity of Elements. You can currently buy this for 2 to 3 divines pretty easily. Of course, if the supply runs out, the price could go up to 4, 5, 6, but you very much want 1 Spiked Concoction, get the Alchemist Genius. This will give you 20% Flask effect. And you do want a Septic Spells. This will allow you to cap your chance to poison. Very important thing when playing poison click on your skill, look at chance to poison, make sure that's at least 100%. I'm at 109%. I'm a little bit over. See, other interesting things is because we're cast while channeling, we can use this Chaos Mastery. If we were self-cast, we really wouldn't want to lose all of our life and energy shield every time we're casting. This allows us to use this very easily, which is pretty nice. The triggered Soul Rend does not trigger the 10% loss of life, which is really good. What else? Yeah, 100% spell suppression. As you can see, I got 84, 83, 83 on my max res. My evasion like this in this setup is only 69%, but we can get that up to 75 to 80% if you do want to go out for that. Ideally, if you could get like a plus 8% grace with the Fizz taken as, that would be a big upgrade for the Watcher's Eye. This is just the budget 2 to 3 divine version. Let's see. On the boots, we have Poisons Faster, which is kind of like whatever, but it does lower the amount of ramp time to hit our max damage, as well as Sapped Ground while moving. This is really good. Sapped Ground will make the enemy deal, I think it's 8% less damage, 6% less damage. This is a 6% less damage multiplier, so this will stack in addition to Enfeeble and all of our less damage taken stuff. So really, really good, actually, really efficient for less damage taken. We want Chaos Leech, just kind of nice to have a little bit of leech there. Chaos.multi while affected by unique enemy. Increased damage during a flask effect, really good. I'm actually over on the spell suppression, so you don't need these T1 rolls. You can go for less of that. And in fact, if you want to max your spell suppression on a budget, you can go for very, very little spell suppression on your gear and just go for tattoos. As you'll see, I went for 10 2% movement speed tattoos. I had so much dexterity that I was able to really stack movement speed tattoos. And that's part of what makes this build so particularly comfortable and fast, even with 24% movement speed boots, is stacking all of those tattoos. We're using Poacher's Mark right here. This is a really cool thing that I saw Jung Roan using in his Poisonous Concoction build. The cool thing here is, despite us not using attacks by default, with Cyclone, we are hitting relatively often, and we're getting a nice life and mana recovery. We don't really care about mana, but the life recovery here is really good. Additional physical damage to hits is good. You know, more physical damage is more poison for us, as well as a chance to gain frenzy charges. So this will allow us to sustain frenzy charges while we're bossing, which is really nice. Cool thing that you can do here, even in the budget setup, is when you're mapping, you can replace Awakened Void Manipulation, just having more cats out. You don't need the max damage while you're mapping right here. You can even toss in a Dying Sun if you want to spend a little bit more money. They're like 10 divines right now, so I'm not recommending that explicitly. But then this will give us, how many? 12 projectiles in a spiral. So there will be so many cats on the screen. It'll kind of saturate the screen, which is really, really nice. For mapping, feels pretty good. I'm using Soul of Arakali and Rislatha. More Life Flask is really good. Reduced life regen for enemies is really good. And then because we have 100% Fizz conversion. Oh, also, yeah, there's always a little bit more things. Immutable Force. You want to have this roll. You can even use a min-rolled one. You don't need a high-rolled one. I did have a little bit of stun and block recovery on one of my items, so I was over 965. Even a min-rolled one will feel really good. You'll still have a 2-tick instead of a 1-tick stun, which feels way better than a 10-tick stun. So I'd recommend tossing in Immutable Force. Really good for not worrying about getting stunned while you're cycloning around. You can even min-roll it. It's totally fine. That's it. The rest of my jewels are kind of just like whatever. So that's the build. I'm really happy with it. Like I said, at a budget, it can farm T17s. It's not a Giga T17 farmer, but it is very tanky and comfortable. And yeah, just remember to plus that Life Flask. Today on stream, we're going to go all out. We're going to try to push this build a little bit higher. I'm going to buy a Nimbus, I'm going to buy a Progenesis, and I'm going to start double corrupting Cloak of Flames and pushing this build to the next level and just try to make it a very solid T17 farmer. So yeah, that's it for me. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate y'all if you watched this far. And yeah, hope to see you guys on stream. Goodbye.